They almost left a goat bleat in it. Like, so this exact sound, da-dung, they almost put at the end of it, da-dung, and I heard the actual one. I couldn't put it in my podcast because Netflix was like, you know what? We're a gigantic organization, and we don't want to just give this to...
You do a great impersonation on your podcast.
It sounded exactly like that.
That and so much more coming right up on today's episode of The Pod Spotter. You're listening to The Pod Spotter. I'm your host, Zach Robidas. There's too many podcasts out there, okay? And that is why I'm here. I'm going to listen to them, and I'm going to bring you the good ones. We're going to do the heavy lifting, find the diamonds in the rough, and every Monday we'll talk to the creators and the hosts, and we're going to learn about their pods, play clips. Hopefully you'll learn something or find it useful. And if you do, subscribe to our pod. Visit thepodspotter.com and on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at ThePodSpotter for extra content and info on upcoming shows. Then like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. It's really a pleasure. I've been screening hundreds of podcasts. Imagine preparing for the perfect date night. To look good, you'd go to a professional barber, maybe throw on some expensive makeup. You'd spend time and money researching the perfect cologne or perfume so you smell your very best. You'd go with that new cashmere sweater you've been trolling on Instagram so you're pleasing to the touch. For dinner, you've chosen that new upscale Scandinavian joint with modern flair and newly acquired Michelin star. For sight, taste, touch, and smell, we read reviews, we try things on, we ask around, and we solicit the help of professionals. We decide what we eat, smell, watch, and touch. But sound, uniquely, is the one sense that happens to us all the time, whether we like it or not. Now, surely we choose the song or the occasional podcast about podcasts, but beyond that, we are constantly receiving information in our ears. Information we know nothing about. Our world is full of sound, and like a sommelier to taste, a masseuse to touch, a perfumist to smell, or a curator to sight, we can refine our sense of hearing with the help of today's podcast, 20,000 Hertz. Oh, baby, we got a big one for you today, guys. Each episode, creator, host, and sound connoisseur Dallas Taylor brings you the stories behind the world's most interesting and recognizable sounds. Joining me to discuss his love of sound, the significance of silence, and some of what he's learned from producing his eclectic library of over 100 episodes is Mr. Dallas Taylor. Thank you for being here, Dallas, and thank you for sharing your pod with us today. How are you?
I am just marveling at that outstandingly written intro.
Whoa, wow.
I might have to just steal all of that and just...
It's yours. No theft.
Beautifully written. That was great. Thank you.
It's all yours. It's none of my original ideas. It's things that I just, heard from you talking about sound.
I was shaking my head the whole time.
Love hearing you talk about it. Well, it's what, it's sort of the ideas behind your whole philosophy about sound,
right.
Is it not?
It's kind of my thing. Yeah. First off, I noticed that you're wearing a super soft 20,000 Hertz t-shirt. So for anyone who has heard the show, how soft is it?
So soft. It's PJ
Very
soft.
Yeah.
I know I'm doing the thing. I'm a bit of the guy wearing the band, concert t-shirt to the concert, but it's just so soft. I haven't taken it off since it arrived. Now, Dallas, normally we feature up-and-coming pods and hidden gems, but it's likely to be our last record for the year, so we're going out with a banger here. How, sir, do you describe the podcast?
The tagline is the stories behind the world's most recognizable and interesting sounds. And so if you think of like maybe what Bourdain did for food, that's what kind of the marker is for what we're trying to do with sound. And we certainly talk occasionally about music, albeit in a slightly different way than what a normal music journalist would do. But we're really trying to like extract this joyous sense that brings us, that, you know, any of us who have our sense of hearing, that we can all share together.
And it is the winner of the 2019 Webby People's Voice Award for Best Original Music, Sound Design, the 2020 Webby Award for Science and Education, as well as the People's Voice Award for Science and Education. And none of those trophies are behind you right now.
Oh, yes, they are.
Any display.
Right.
Oh, is that one?
There.
I mean, my goodness, would I get a nice tweet about mine and I want to frame it and put it on the wall behind us. I can't. Those are your Webbies?
Those are, yeah. There's 3. It looks like 2, but there's 1 snuck behind there.
They're beautiful. Look at those guys.
They're very springy. They make a cool sound. Kind of goes.
Oh, that's good that they make a sound. Of course, beautiful. And
Fun fact.
what is the significance of the title of 20,000 Hertz for people that have limited knowledge of sound?
When we're kids, at least, we can generally hear all the way up to 20,000 hertz. And as we get older, we hear up to 19,000 hertz, and then 18,000, and then 17,000, then 16. And it's totally normal. But the significance of the name is the upper reaches of human hearing.
And for those fortunate enough to be able to hear things, what are some sounds at those highs and the lows that exist in nature, I guess?
Maybe on the low frequency, you can go really low with something like a wind turbine that's kind of going. Woo,
Cool.
woo,
Yeah.
woo. So that's going to push air because basically sound works just by pushing and contracting on air. And then up at the upper reaches, it's more like brilliance and sparkle. You know, like I think that the difference would be maybe something like a rolled splash cymbal might sound a little bit more brilliant and bright to a young person versus someone who's in their 50s or 60s.
Do we know what animal on Earth hears like the highest frequency? Or
I don't know the top, but I know that we're working on a show right now where yesterday I recorded and said that dogs can hear up to, I believe it was 140,000 hertz. Now, take that with a grain of salt because we haven't fully fact-checked the show, which we always do. But 140,000 hertz, like that is unbelievable to even think about.
Wow.
How high that would go. But that's why dog whistles work and dogs can hear it. We can't. But yeah, their hearing goes way, way up. And things like, there's other animals like whales or elephants that can hear lower and they communicate with lower rumbles. But really what's cool about sound and us humans is that our ears, these frequencies that we hear, are all products of our natural environment. So our ears are so incredibly tuned to this particular spot in the universe.
So your podcast covers everything that we can hear and maybe a little bit beyond, maybe what dogs can hear too.
Yeah, we've done an episode on ultrasonic sounds in the past where people can use these high-pitched frequencies to do a couple of weird things. Like they can make this is really freaky, but they can make your cell phones pick up a tone if you have an app on it, and it can communicate in frequencies that we can't really perceive to make your phone kind of communicate with each other. And other things is like in some places they might put these really high-pitched frequencies like at a gas station outside where young people might loiter, and they might just blast this that people who are 30 and above might not be able to perceive at all, but it kind of drives out people who still have those frequencies in their ears. It's wild.
What was the thing like a couple of years ago with like the UN or ambassadors were targeted with sound? Like that was the way some
Cuba.
Governments were. Yeah, what was happening there?
So we actually we were kind of on the front line of all this stuff, and there was so much speculation of a sonic attack down there, and doing what I do and kind of having friends who are acousticians and things like that. I was asking them, I was like, is this possible? And they were like, we're really not. I mean, because these acousticians are people who are being contracted from the government to advise. And they were like, I don't think so. Just the amount of energy it takes to push a high frequency really far and targeted is very, very difficult. So they were really skeptical on that idea of being a sonic attack. And I think it later came out that there was some other aspect to it. But it brings up an interesting point, because when we have like one of our senses, and you did a great job like talking about our other senses that we curate, taste, touch, sight, we smell, we curate those things just fine. We do it. And like, we know about it. We know what we like to eat. We know what we like to see. We know the paint colors. Everything around you is designed by you or some human. But with sound, like, there's so much confusion around it, and it's a core sense that we don't necessarily treat with the same level of curation as those other senses. We kind of go, oh, I like this music, and therefore that is all that I think about on the sound front. But what I really want to do is just like let people be okay with curating their sonic world more, and just realizing how cool even designed sounds and how much time and effort go into those sounds. And the stories behind them too. And so sometimes we're doing some brain stuff. Most of the time we're taking something that you've heard before and just deconstructing it to the max, and really explaining, a 6-month or year-long process of how a short sound was made and thought about from the designers directly.
I've run out of superlatives to describe your podcast and talk about it. It is my favorite kind of podcast. When you present something that I already know about, and then you're like, here's these 6 things that you may not have known about that thing. Or you introduce a totally new thing to people, and you're like, here's 6 or 7 things that you didn't know about this thing that you didn't know about. And it's always fascinating, and you always learn something about our lives and how we fit in the world around us. And so I think for our time today, Dallas, I just kind of want to play some of the sounds of your podcast and then mine you for some of the interesting and weird things that you've learned from producing this now vast library of podcasts. I think in your 50th episode, you go into like a lot of the nuts and bolts of how you make it. And often that's what we end up talking about on our pod. But I would just direct people to go to episode 50 of Dallas's pod if you want to know more about the nuts and bolts of that. And for today, I just want to play some sounds and listen to you talk about sound.
Sure. Yeah.
I know that you are nervous about becoming the sound guy synonymous with silence, but I have to, I think, start with 433.
Right, yeah.
433 fits into sort of your philosophy on sound and everything, and so I think it's a good place to start. 433, what is 433 for folks who haven't heard it?
Yeah, so 433 was a piece that John Cage wrote, and John Cage was a composer, kind of experimental, kind of in the middle of the last century here. And he was really great about kind of like making almost thought experiments around these pieces that he would make. But he was also really frustrated at when Muzak started happening. And he was like, can we not just get like quiet places? Like, do we need like constant sounds? And so he made a joke, I think at like at some sort of talk or whatever about, I'm going to sell a 4.5 minute long piece to Muzak and make royalties and hopefully have 4.5 minutes of silence or something quiet in a grocery store. But that's kind of beside the point, because it turned into something that really started to matter. And I think it's, looking back in hindsight, I think it had to be a musician to show people how to give people an understanding of how beautiful sound is to begin with. So if we think about sound, our whole sonic world, we generally think about music, and music is great. Music is beautiful. We create it. It's art. But the vast majority of the sonic world is not music. And so I think John Cage was trying to communicate that by making this piece, a pianist coming out, sitting down, and closing the piano lid and doing nothing for 1.5 minutes. And of course, people were giggling. People were like, what is going on? And then the second movement, closed piano, open up, close. And then I think it was like 30 seconds or something. And then the last movement, same deal. And so at the time, it's like, oh, this is a joke. What is he trying to say? The laziest way to make a piece of music is just to not make anything and just call it something artistic. And so it was really like kind of brushed aside as being, some artsy-fartsy person doing something artsy-fartsy. But over time, I think that John Cage had a lot of foresight of where we were going, because now our worlds are getting, of course, noisier and noisier. And what he was trying to communicate is that he doesn't necessarily see a massive difference between like music and like the sound of the world, because the sound of the world can be really visceral, whether you're listening to traffic, the sound of the movement of the world, or you're listening to birdsong, or you're listening to wind, or if you've ever been at the top of a mountain and you hear this just like gorgeous silence, quietness. And so it's a piece that a lot of people talk about as being a silent piece, but what John Cage was trying to say, trying to force people to do, is become conscious about the current moment and the current space that they were in.
We'll play a bit from, this is a section of 433. You're taking us there. So folks, your headphones or however you're listening is working fine. We're going to be playing a bit from 433 and have a listen to the world around you. So no two productions of 433 have ever been the same. Is that,
right?
Would that be fair to say?
Well, what's interesting is if everyone kind of, if you participated in that and really thought about what you're hearing, you probably heard things that you have never really, that you might not, it was kind of there, but you never consciously thought that they were there, because our brain is amazing and it filters out a lot of stuff that we don't need to know to survive. But yeah, so I find that whole idea fascinating. Of course, no performance is the same because every environment is new. And then the rabbit hole on that whole concept just goes really deep. But the spirit of it is just how amazing it is to hear, and giving people kind of a visceral moment, an excuse to just hear what world they're in.
I got to tell you, my wife is so sick of me right now from listening to your podcast, because I've been like De Niro in Awakenings, like, babe, just listen to that carrot against the cheese grater. Just listen to that sound. Like I've been
sounds so good.
Yeah, just like appreciating sound for the first time like an idiot. But that is what, your podcast has done, and what 433 has done is like made me aware of just sounds in general, and thinking about how they're made and how they happen, and taking a sort of, as you talk about, an active role in my listening. And like, there's sort of an endless amount of information that we're receiving, and it's fun to ask questions about how a sound happens and how it's made. And 433, it made it to the top of the pop charts in like 2009 or something. Like the song, you can go to YouTube, you can see performances of this, but it has gained a new relevance again, as you said, as our world has gotten noisier.
I do think if we kind of become more conscious of our surroundings and start to think about like intimate spaces and how we can do that, like you had mentioned about a restaurant before, there's nothing I love more than a beautiful, like a great meal, maybe a little bit of music, that's fine, but as long as I can speak at like this level and hear the nuance of someone else speaking to me, like I just love the intimacy and the quietness of like community.
Well, one sound that has helped fill the silence for so many over the course of this pandemic is our next sound that we'll play. What was that sound, Alice?
Well, that was the Netflix sound. At least the Netflix sound after a year of working on it and a year of just like painstakingly crafting how they wanted this major company to sound. And it is a relatively new sound, but I would go as far as saying it's the most influential sound in all of entertainment.
Wow.
No.
And you talk about new sounds and old sounds a lot. Like what? This sound is 4 years old, right? Or 6 years old or something like that.
Shockingly, yeah. I mean, it's so influential. It's kind of like the Fox, brum bump, bump, brrrr bump. Like it's that lineage. Or Leo the lion going, and the MGM lion logo going, like. So what Netflix was trying to do here is make something relevant for streaming, because they knew that like whatever they do, it has to be really, really short, because they don't have time to do a full fanfare. Because when you do a fanfare, you're usually sitting in a theater, you are locked in, they have your full attention. But when you're streaming, like they understood early on that like they got to get you in quick. Otherwise, you can spend another hour just scrolling for content. And so that was the spirit of it. Surprisingly, they went through all kinds of iterations. Some of them I didn't hear, some of them I did. They had this like bubbly thing kind of bubbling up from the earth. This was the, what do they call this? The knock and the blossom, I believe. but they almost left a goat bleat in it. Like, so this exact sound, da-dung, they almost put at the end of it, da-dung, and I heard the actual one. I couldn't put it in my podcast because Netflix was like, you know what? We're a gigantic organization, and we don't want to just give this to...
You do a great impersonation on your podcast.
It sounded exactly like that.
This is a sonic brand, right? And this is a phrase that we hear a lot on your podcast. What this is the definition of a good sonic brand. What is a sonic brand exactly?
Yeah, so a sonic brand is basically the sonic logo, the visual logo of something. So when we have, like McDonald's, let's see if I can whistle.
Yeah.
Now that's kind of a jingle hybrid with a sonic brand, but that's the idea. Is we hear them all the time. Apple TV has a thing. Hulu has a gorgeous sounding interface and all kinds of amazing stuff. They keep changing it though, and I'm like, Hulu, it sounds so cool, but then they replace it and it sounds even cooler.
Yeah.
Disney Plus has like a sound, and so these are just like mnemonics to just get kind of two senses aligned. Just trying to get these two senses, visual, sound, embedded deeply in your brain. So yeah, the Netflix audio logo is kind of like the standard for every audio logo. I mean, we do sonic. I'm a sound designer, and so with my company, De Facto Sound, we do sonic branding as well. And it's and every brief we've ever gotten since Netflix came out is kind of like the Netflix sound.
Wow.
And so they're kind of the standard for that.
It's amazing how they do seem to have all gotten shorter over the years. Like when I think of the HBO, the old HBO one, sitting down to a movie was like, and then like the HBO's flying over the sky. It's like 4 minutes long. Too. So good.
And we're working on that show right now too.
Oh, really?
We're trying to tell that story, and the stat, we call it the static angel. I don't know if we ripped that from somebody else, but it's the thing that goes,
oh, so good.
Yeah.
Something's about to happen. When you hear that, you're about to have an experience.
And
but
so
Netflix
much thought
does
goes
it really
into
well.
it.
And so what is you said the thump and resolve. What exactly makes up that bum bum resolve?
Yeah, it was a combination. So the two sound designers who worked on it, they Lon and Charlie. The one is a ring. The fundamental aspect of it. Because when we're sound designing, we're usually adding all kinds of layers to it. But the fundamental is just his wedding ring on a cabinet, just. And then I think they sweetened it with some low thumps. Sometimes we'll add low thumps, like if we're doing an explosion or something, we'll add that bass element. But yeah, is the root. And what's interesting is, like, I don't know if we ever explicitly said this on the show, but the executive at Netflix who led the campaign said something early in the interview. He was like, what we really, really wanted was something that basically said, ta-dum, it's Netflix. And then I realized, wait a second, that is the audio logo. And that's what led them down this year-long path of trying all kinds of stuff. And then it kind of led back to, ta-dum, it's Netflix.
Wow.
And the actual blossom, so the boom boom, is a lot of sounds just kind of giving us texture and stuff. Fundamental being a wedding ring on a cabinet. And then the blossom is actually a guitar. You'd never notice it, but Charlie was just noodling around on a guitar a decade ago, maybe 15 years ago, and had this delay thing happening, and they just extracted one little moment from this long little like noodling around thing that was just whoa, and we play the before and after that in the show too, where it's like everything leading into that, and then for a moment you hear it's just like and it's amazing. Like, so he just pulled that out from someplace and they kind of added that as like the resolution.
I also was wondering about how, we know that the show that made Netflix sort of put it on the map initially is House of Cards.
Right,
and the lead character, Case Bay, who shall remain nameless, I don't know, his whole, like one of his things was doing the wedding ring tap on the desk. And I wondered if there was any,
I asked for that explicitly because we had a thread talking about that in the show. And so I asked everybody, I was like, did it come from just the end of season 2 of House of Cards? And as you can imagine, it's a very sensitive topic. And that's where I really wanted to dig in. Was it just pulled from that? And I asked the sound designers, I asked PR, I asked the person leading it. And I am convinced that, at least through the sound designers and stuff, they said, I mean, that was something happening around that time. And they said that like that idea was kind of, floating around, but he was like never at one point, this is the sound designers. They were like never at any point where we like make that sound.
Interesting.
I am convinced that it still went back to Todd Yellin, who was kind of the executive in charge of this project. I think it's more influenced by the words "ta-dum, it's Netflix" more than House of Cards.
Man, so that is a good Sonic brand. Do you have examples of bad ones that you don't enjoy? And follow-up, is Aflac a Sonic brand, or is that just the title of the thing?
Yeah, I would say it's a Sonic brand. I kind of consider Sonic brands as something very short that can be pulled out of a jingle. But now, like nowadays, we're doing hybrid things where you can take kind of a jingle and take one little thing out of it. Going back to HBO, if you we're working with the people who made the new rebrand, not new. But when you hear like, you just sang the thing, like, love it. I mean, I love that feeling. And it was long and it was a big cinematic thing. And that's where HBO was at the time. But now when a show starts, you hear this cool little delay thing that goes like, and it's it's the throwback to that original thing. And so brands are really smart about like keeping those sort of ideas. And right now we're working on the McDonald's thing, the I'm Loving It idea, which has this amazing backstory that one of the most successful Sonic brand jingle things ever. And I'm just fascinated with how much goes into it. These are gigantic projects and gigantic amounts of information going into seconds of sound.
And but often these gigantic projects get boiled down to a CEO then presenting it to his 10-year-old daughter and saying, "Does this sound good?"
Exactly. That's what happened in the case of Netflix. So Todd Yellin presented it to his 10-year-old daughter. 3 things at the end that he was struggling with. And one of them was the da-dung, goat. And of course, she picked the one that we now hear now. Because she was not, sometimes it's easy to not see the forest from the trees when you're so involved with it for a year. And then a 10-year-old walks up and goes, "That's so obvious. It's that one. Like, use that one." And he's like, "Oh, okay."
That is a fun segue, talking about taste to talking about this sound. Dallas Taylor, name that sound.
Stradivarius violin.
Wow, yes, that is the Stradivarius from episode 73. If you don't know anything about music, chances are you know a little something about the Stradivarius. Can you talk about what the lengths they went to record the Stradivarius in Italy?
I think it's no shock that a lot of like music that we hear nowadays in TV and stuff is triggered music. And so these are real symphonies, but they're being played into like a piano. Like a lot of music nowadays is not like some cases it's like a fake symphony or some of these hybrids that might have symphonic elements, but then it also has like, drum and bass or like, synths that are with it and stuff. Like most of the time they're not really like recording a symphony, but they did go out and they originally recorded every note of a symphony to where you could go into your keyboard and now you could play a symphony with your fingers. So in this case, it's kind of a hybrid of 2 different things. One, they wanted to get this company, I believe it was Native Instruments, which is kind of the leader in I guess, soft or sampled instruments and stuff. They've just brilliant. They've sampled 1 billion amazing pianos and symphonies and strings and all kinds of stuff. But the biggest name in all of stringed instruments, especially violins, is Stradivarius or Stradivari, and that was from Antonio Stradivari. So Stradivarius violin. And so they did this long process where they wanted to record kind of a handful. I think it was like 3. I'm blanking on exactly how many, but they had like 2 violins, I think, and then a viola, maybe a cello. I can't remember that aspect to it. But they went to Cremona, which is the birthplace of Stradivari, and they went into the Museum of the Violin. And so they have this big, absolutely stunningly beautiful hall there. So they're like, oh, we're going to use this hall to record one note at a time with multiple people, all kinds of different pressure points. Something very light, something very heavy, because the violin is impossible to fake, in my opinion. It's like the violin is like so close to the human voice, and could you imagine playing, like recording every nuance of a human voice into a keyboard that would be at any point believable when you now start to play it back? It's like that's about how hard a violin is to record. And so they spent months doing this, and the interesting thing about this is that they have a brilliant hall, but Cremona is like cobblestone streets, like right outside of the back door. Like there's a door and it goes straight to the street. And when you're now trying to get everything so quiet to be able to record the delicacy of a light, tiny little touch of a violin bow on a string, just slowly doing its thing, it's almost impossible not to hear what's happening from like 5 blocks away, because it's so delicate. So they ended up shutting down like this whole radius around this hall just to get it quiet enough inside the hall to be able to record this delicate instrument.
It's hard to imagine in normal times, like them shutting down Times Square because Hamilton is recording. Like, it's just unbelievable.
Right, that's about it.
They just were like, nope, traffic, everything, go other ways. We got to get this beautiful, beautiful sound, which we then learned from your podcast, from the double blind test, which was what I found to be the most interesting part of this episode, was that older doesn't necessarily mean the best. It has all of this reverence. It has all of this mystique around it. But in a double blind test, the young violins were sort of pluckier and brighter. And
yeah, that's true. Amazing violins are being made. And I'm not a violinist, but I have very close friends who are. But it's so much more, when you're on like a professional violin level, you know the history of the violin in your hands, and that is beautiful. You know who owned it before, you know who owned it before that, you know who owned it before that. What's magical about the Stradivarius violin is that Stradivarius really, really like locked in kind of the modern violin. He was like a master craftsman. And so that's where a lot of this value comes from. One, it's an amazing violin. It's really old and it's still playable. But two, if you're having a Stradivarius violin, like, it's some of the world's best violinists' lineage that you are now taking on in this instrument. And I think that's what's magical about it. And you can certainly buy a new one, an amazing one. It's going to sound incredible. But the magic of a Stradivari violin is just that, like, the history in this thing is just mind-boggling.
It is a sort of evergreen on your show to play Guess the Sound, and I think this is a good opportunity to take a break and play Guess the Sound with Dallas Taylor. And should you guess the sounds correctly, I'm going to proudly display this 20,000 Hertz sticker on the pod swag wall behind me. If you can guess 2 out of 3 of these sound cues. Are you ready for Guess That Sound from your podcast, Dallas Taylor?
Oh, I would love this.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Sound cue number 1. Let's have a listen.
Wait, did that come from my podcast?
No.
Okay, good. Okay, so I'm just guessing sounds here.
You're just guessing sounds.
Okay, that's adorable, first of all. So I'm going to guess what I think it is. I don't think it's a Zerbert. I mean, but it sounds like it's being like almost like a straw or something under a bathtub while a kid is laughing. It sounds like the reverberance from the giggling is like a bathroom, and the giggling is just amazing. Like a lot of people, anybody who's ever heard me speak about like my favorite sound, it's the sound of my children and their voices and their laughter. So I just get so much joy out of hearing that. But it sounds like there's almost like a straw or something that someone's blowing underwater and making bubbles in a bathroom with a child. And now I'm dying. I could do this all day long, no joke. Like this is what I want to do with my life, is just guess sounds. So tell me, what is this?
That is indeed me just blowing bubbles, dunking my head in the tub, and trying to get my daughter to laugh. It is. Yeah, the best sound
I didn't
in the
know
world.
that you would go that far. I
went deep for this. I actually went deep underwater. I spend my days just trying to get the full belly laugh, the coveted full belly laugh from my 1-year-old, and I got to work for it. But I found that bubbles in the tub will get her every time. I don't know.
And I bet putting your head in it too.
That's why I was like, it is.
I was like, did somebody actually put their head in the tub to do this? Because that's what it sounds like. So I'm just going to be a little safe and do like a straw or something.
Straw, yeah.
I'm going to try that at next bath time.
It's a mess, and you'll get it. You'll get report back. All right, that's number one. Straw. The straw isn't a disqualifier. You got bubbles and kid laughing.
And bathroom.
Acoustics of the bathroom. We're going to give you number one. That is daughter laughing at bubbles. Sound number two, please.
Ooh, this is tough. I'm pretty sure that I'm going to be wrong, but this is my best guess. The ambient sound lends itself to I'm hearing some sort of air conditioner or heat, and so something is we're inside. I think I'm hearing just the sound of something consistent. So we're either right next to I doubt a refrigerator. But I'm thinking kind of like the heat is on, or the air conditioner, and then what I'm thinking of is that it's just like a ratchet, just going like you're just slowly turning like those ratchets, and you're just doing it kind of slowly in a circle. Like that's what I'm hearing.
I'm realizing the flaw of my game. I arbitrarily picked sounds and presented them to an audiophile who is CSI dissecting the sounds and looking for hints that I didn't supply, and I should have picked better sounds. That is the room tone. I apologize for. I don't know why that was so loud, but the sound of the clicking is what I wanted you to focus on. Mm-hmm. And it is a thing spinning. It is the old iPad click wheel, which was a hotly contested.
I should have gotten that one.
No, the ambient noise threw you off there. And,
I am totally gonna do that on my podcast. Like the.
Yeah.
I remember that circle wheel. Yeah.
That satisfying click. Like I know that's still like something that iPhone fans are like. Hey, can you just put it back on just one model? Yeah. Like that is like
just so doing beloved. A circle with the like.
Remember just scrolling through songs like that doesn't. It doesn't. Yeah. You don't have that satisfying click anymore. Mm-hmm. That was a toughie.
That was fun, though. I like that sound.
It is a good sound, and I'll be excited to hear it on 20,000 Hertz. Let's play sound number 3.
Ooh, that sounds good. It reminds me, it's a Euler disc idea. So Euler disc, if you ever, EULER disc, if you go to YouTube, and I assume I'm wrong, but if you go to YouTube and see Euler disc, like you get the idea is that whole idea of you have like this circle thing on like a hard surface and you just let it go shrink, and if everything's super level and it's like perfectly balanced, it'll do this really long like
Into that, yeah.
And so you're doing something with something that's a circle, I know that, and it's on a hard surface. And it's probably thin, I think it's metal, or it's glass, or I don't think it's plastic unless it's very hard plastic, but it's something probably, I don't know, in your kitchen on like, if you have like a granite countertop or something, and you're just spinning it around, and letting it do that really cool Euler disc vibe.
You got it. You got thin, round glass. It's just two glass jars resolving against each other as you pick them up.
And it is glass jars.
One of my favorite sound. Yeah, letting them abut against each other and letting the bases collide. And the collision at first starts out wonky, and then it goes into this beautiful harmony, this like they just resolve and become one sound. It's sort of awesome. And if I were a smarter person, I'd
have rhythm
be able to make a metaphor for something. But it's my second favorite sound in the world. You could do it with two whiskey glasses too. When you pick up two like symmetrical whiskey glasses, their butts together will. And then it resolves and tickles my brain in a weird, wonderful way. That's definitely one, and then like a suspect two. So I think we're gonna do a fourth little bonus one.
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
Just because you love this game so much and because you're having a good time. Let's really bring it home with this one. We're getting 20,000 Hertz up on the pod wall.
Oh, that's Star Wars. Yeah. It took me a bit because there was a growl in there, and I was like, "Is that a big engine starting up?" Because when we're sound designing car spots, we'll have this big, but we'll add like a lion growl going like to it. And then I heard the elephants and the TIE fighters, I believe, and then I kind of then you started doing all that stuff, and I was like, "Oh yeah, that's Star Wars." Brilliant sound design. There's so many animal aspects to the mechanical. Yeah. That's why it gets so much like personality to it.
Dallas, that's enough to get the sticker on the pod wall. Well done. Congratulations. You know your sound. Oh, that's Star Wars. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. I got you. I'm here for you. I'm looking for great content for you. And if you like the show, please check us out and subscribe. Visit thepodspotter.com and on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram @thepodspotter for lots of good stuff. And please leave a review. Subscribe, rate, judge us on Apple Podcasts, and help spread the word. We release every Monday with a review of a wonderful new pod, and we're going to keep going, keep plowing ahead, whether you're here or not. So be here. And if you have suggestions for pods to feature, drop us a note on any of those social media platforms. Thanks, everybody. Why was this sound chosen for your podcast? Were you a big fan?
Not really, not for a long time. I mean, I do now enjoy it, but it was one of those shows that I think I did not like for a long time.
Yeah.
Maybe because of the music a little bit, but then I realized how brilliant the music is.
Wow.
So what's amazing about that's the theme after Jerry Seinfeld does the stand-up bit at the beginning, and then it goes into this, and then I think they go to break right after this. So what's amazing about this is this whole intro was custom made every single time for the show. Now, the bit you played is usually like what they went into, but what's incredible about that theme song that I never even knew until I did the podcast show about it is that it was, you think that it's all the same track, but what the composer is doing is playing things around Jerry Seinfeld's jokes. And so he had to do it around every single episode. So if every joke stand-up thing before Seinfeld was different. And so he had to make these musical reactions happen when the crowd was reacting too. And there was no way to do this with just a stock track that they just pop in every single time. He had to do it like essentially live, playing and watching the screen every single show of Seinfeld. And it's incredible how brilliant he is at that and how he even convinced them to do that. Because the executives at NBC did not like this music. But,
It didn't sound like anything else. Like I think you mentioned on your pod, everything else before Seinfeld is like big orchestral, and the family's here. Like
that. Think about like Family Ties, or like, it was like this big, feel good thing. But the executives, I think this was on NBC. They didn't like that sound, but it was they said that it annoyed them. And it was Larry David who loved that it annoyed people, and therefore it stayed in the picture. And it's interesting even how the composer was brought onto to that particular show through personal connections and Jerry Seinfeld and just all kinds of people. So again, it's just one thing we take for granted, but then there's just unbelievable story that led us to that.
Yeah. Well, his stuff about like he's a composer and he's like, one day I woke up and I emailed everybody, send me better work than what you've been sending me. I'm not working on crap anymore. Send me good things like that.
I'm just going to do theme songs and does big stuff. Yeah.
That's wild. It leads to probably my favorite piece of audio from your pod, the one that like I just started laughing out loud when I heard. I want to play his sort of discovery moment of that, of I need to compose for Jerry.
I watched Jerry's stand-up comedy, and I noticed that he has a lyric sensibility about the way he delivers his lines, the way he moves, his choreography, his facial expressions move, and there was a meter to it that I put different clocks on. And finally, I settled in on about 110.
I don't think people think of their office as a workplace. I think they think of it as a stationery store with Danish. You know what I mean? You want to get your pastry, your envelopes, your supplies, your toilet paper, 6 cups of coffee, and you go home.
And that seemed to work well with the metrics of Jerry's comedy.
I think that's just, mwah, that's a beautifully produced moment. I mean, and it's so uniquely podcasty, too, that clip. Like, it's just a sprinkle in a little production, help highlight the story that we're being told, let the interview do the talking, and just enhance it a little bit. Like, it's just a beautiful moment.
Stand-up comedy is fascinating to me.
That show, of course, ran for years on this network.
Yeah, so this is a great one. NBC Chimes, the interesting thing, that was our second episode out of 113 right now. And I used to work, one of my early jobs in my early 20s, I worked at the NBC studios in Burbank. And so now the NBC studios are no longer in Burbank, it's in Universal City. But back then there was this gigantic mural right outside of Access Hollywood and Jay Leno. They were like studios right next to each other. And right there was this big mural of the history of NBC. I had worked at NBC for a bit at that point and never knew this story, but I walked by it every day and I found it fascinating, just the whole chime aspect, where it came from. It came out of radio. It came out of a reason. They needed something to cover up a transition from one studio to the other. Nowadays, this is a digital change. Back then, they needed to pull patch cables out and push patch cables in. So if you're going from one program to another, they needed something to cover up the to the next thing.
Wow.
But it used to be 7 notes too, and then it was too long, and they used to do it live. One of the reasons they trimmed it down from 7 to 3 was because the announcers, like the announcer would be like, this is the NBC network, whatever. And then they go, ding, 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 ding. And then they would just mess up because it was like a physical thing that they were doing. And so eventually they shortened it to just the GEC. And yeah, amazing. And that's only scratching the surface of that amazing story. And even the people at NBC didn't really know that story. And so I've heard that they use that podcast just to kind of let marketing understand the history behind
your episode.
Those 3 notes. Yeah.
They use your episode? Man, that sort of became a calling card for you guys a little bit early on, right? Like I remember I think I heard that on This American Life or something.
99% Invisible. So that's really kind of like the start that launched us into the podcast world.
Wow. What is the relationship with 99% Invisible? How did they just hear did Ruben Orris just hear your first episode and was like, let's go?
Yeah, so that's an interesting story. I was like right at the very beginning, because the first episode of 99PI is about sound. And so I immediately found out about it. Back then, I'd reached out, hey, Roman, I love your show. I'm going to be in San Francisco at this game conference or whatnot. If you're around, I'd love to just, meet up. And back then he was like, yeah, sure, let's do that. And so I met him and just said how much I love the show and how cool it is. And it's clear how much heart he has for sound. Years went through with 99PI. He was making some shows about the visual world. He's making more shows about sound. But then eventually 99PI really went into this like the visual designed world. Like back then it wasn't beautiful nerds and in beautiful downtown Oakland, California. Like it takes time to craft what that show is. And so he was still finding that thing, read the plaque, that whole idea. So it took a while to get to that point. But then once 99PI really landed in its sweet spot, the sound shows were becoming a little bit more few and far in between. They still did them, and he still occasionally does them. But I was like, every time 99PI did a show about sound, I was like immediate download, immediate listen, because I just devoured them. But over time, it kind of started to veer into its perfect lane. And I don't know if it was really with his blessing or whatnot. I was like, I want to consume a show that is all sound stories. And he kind of was like, yeah, do it. And then there was no promises of anything. We spent an entire year working on our first 2 tiny episodes because we didn't know what we were doing. And then put out the first episode. A couple hundred people listened to it. Friends and family and stuff. That was the voice of Siri, the original human voice of Siri. And then 2 weeks later, put out the NBC Chimes. A couple hundred people listened to it. I saw Roman. I just passed Roman and like outside in Chicago at the Third Coast Festival a week after we put out the NBC thing. And Roman was like, I really like what you're doing. You mind if I put the NBC Chimes episode on next week's episode? But then from there, it just like jumped us up. massively, like 50 or 60 or 70,000 kind of like subscribers very quickly. And then from then we've just kind of like crept upward to the 120,000 roughly per episode. Then I think it was episode like 10 or 11 when we had ads for the first time.
Is a year common per episode, or have you?
No.
How many hours go into each episode? Because it's a lot. You know, it's 20 minutes.
Well, it took us a year
and
to make the Netflix
full
episode. Yeah. So the Netflix episode we talked about earlier, that did take a year, but that was more because we couldn't get the people. And it takes a lot of convincing when you're going to a multi-billion-dollar company and saying, we want to tell the story behind something that's so intimately behind you. So that takes a lot of time and convincing of people of our intent. But most of our episodes,
a lot of trust.
Right? Yeah. Jeez. So most of our episodes take about 250 plus hours to make every one of them, and usually that is about 4 to 5 months each episode. And so all the time we probably have 10 to 15 episodes in production simultaneously. I think right now we have like 18 or 20. Because I was looking at next year's calendar, and we go all the way into like October. All of the shows are all in production currently. And then we go through this whole scripting phase, like after we record the interviews and put those interviews into transcripts, the writers, who are usually independent and freelance, now we have an internal story editor and a writer who does a handful of the shows too. They go out, they take these words, and then they fill in me, and they craft like Tetris this whole roughly 10 to 12 page script that's just super highly crafted, and that takes forever. We do table reads of every episode where I'm reading my part and they're reading the guest part, and we're like kind of figuring out the structure of it. And then once we kind of go through multiple table reads and multiple reviews with a writer, then we bring it internally. We make it. Then we take that script and we bring in all the audio from the guests and stuff, and then we rip the whole thing apart again, over and over and over and over again until it's just like pristine. So when you listen to it, it just flows and it just feels very relaxing. It feels like everything is just very intentional. But we toil over every second of that show. Every day.
It's quite clear. You're an expert at sound. Continue making sound. You are an expert at producing this podcast. But, Dallas Taylor, are you an expert at knowing your podcast? We have one more segment on our show. How well do you know your pod? Dallas Taylor, you have swag on the pod shelf, but it's not a top shelf pod yet. You can make it to the upper top shelf, depending on how you do. Then our next segment of How Well Do You Know Your Pod, I'm going to ask you 3 questions based on your podcast. How many of those can you get correct? 2 out of 3, you're a top shelf pod. Are you ready for How Well Do You Know Your Pod? Do your best impression of the Wilhelm scream.
Ah! I can't scream because I'll peek, but it has a clear, rounded thing. Ah!
Clear, rounded. Let's have a listen to the Wilhelm scream.
Hear that?
There it is.
Don't have perfect pitch, but you hear that. Ah!
There it is. Real quickly, what is the Wilhelm scream?
That is a famous movie sound effect that was put into many movies. That came from an old thing, and I think it was Ben Burt that put it into Star Wars, and then another thing, and then another thing, and then it became an audio joke, and then it became a cultural joke after decades. Not joke, but a cultural acknowledgement, and then now it's pretty much extinct. But
really?
I have heard from the people at Skywalker that there is a new Wilhelm scream equivalent that no one has discovered yet.
Oh, there's something out there that is
something else. Yeah,
an evergreen that is a little calling card for sound designers.
No one has found, including myself. Yeah,
and so it must be in the Star Wars films.
Yes, it is. One of the mixers on the Star Wars films told me where it was in a scene, and I kind of just like put my fingers in my ear and like, I don't want to know. But at some point, I want to go down on a rabbit, kind of like a hunt for this. And maybe put that call out on my podcast. That'd be a good idea.
Has the Wilhelm scream, is that on your pod? Is that featured in any other episodes other than the one that it's about?
No, I don't think so. I think, we did an episode on the whole history of the Wilhelm scream, who we speculate it was, who was the singer of the Purple People Eater song. And kind of what stage it happened on, when it happened, what film it premiered on, what film came next, and then when it really started as a film meme, if you will, from Ben Burt. super famous Star Wars sound designer, who's legendary.
The Wilhelm scream, used in hundreds and hundreds of films. That one guy who pretending to be eaten by an alligator.
Yeah.
That's 1 for 1. Number 2, what is the uncanny valley?
Oh, you're really digging back there. So uncanny valley, that is like the whole concept that like a humanoid, there's this idea that like something is human and you accept it in your brain. There's something that's a robot that you know is a robot, but then when something gets too much like a human, but it's like humanoid, but to the point where it's like creepy, like a creepy humanoid doll or like a android or something, where then there's this, it's not unsettling as just like a cutesy robot. You know, it's a little bit more, maybe there's more features. Now it has skin, and now we're dipping into the uncanny valley, and now it's blinking, or now it's saying phrases that are a little bit too like weird. That's the valley that we go through before we come back up to like a human.
The study shows there's a curve. Up here, the thing looks, talks, moves a whole lot like a human. And this might be C-3PO.
Oh, yes, Master Luke.
Roughly speaking. And up here doesn't have any resemblance. It's R2-D2. Down in here, there's this area where people get freaked out. The C-3PO appealing.
Over here!
R2-D2 appealing for a completely different reason. Down in here might be the Edison talking down. Just creepy.
I love using those two robots as the bookends. And then this sort of reoccurring character, I've heard it on a couple episodes of yours, the Edison doll was like the first talking robot, I guess.
Yeah, first talking doll.
Had a whole record player in it? What was that?
Yeah, and I've taken, it's funny, I found old, like, toys in my mother-in-law's garage before, and I've taken it apart, and I've seen that it's just basically the whole concept of a vinyl record, except for just plastic and a little stylus on it, and it's all physical. There's no like amplifier or batteries or anything, and so it's just kind of like, that whole idea of just like a stylus on a disc of sorts.
2 for 2. That's the Uncanny Valley episode. That's great. That's episode 10. Is that the scariest thing you've learned in doing this podcast, or the creepiest thing? What has there been anything that you're like, ooh, I don't like where that's going? Because you're talking to all these, scientists and futurists.
So there's one, it's coming up though. Like, we have very much avoided even that Cuba talk of the sonic weapons. I've avoided the topic of sonic weapons as much as humanly possible until it became so overwhelming through the past few months that I had to like figure it out. So the thing that creeps me out the most, and this will come out sometime next year, the whole idea of like sonic weapons, especially to like disperse crowds and stuff. The thing that makes me very, and the reason I never wanted to touch it, because I didn't want to teach people how to make a bomb, basically. Like, I don't want that idea of like, oh, we're going to talk about sonic weapons, and therefore I'm going to teach you how to do this. I don't want to do that. I want people to love sound and all this stuff. But these weapons have been used on protesters, and that's not good. That there are these military devices being used on American citizens that can quite literally damage people's hearing for the rest of their lives. And so, while we are very positive, we're very poppy, we're very intentionally not trying to cover subjects like that, I felt like I had no choice at some point but to acknowledge that.
We'll look forward to that very disturbing episode. Can't wait.
Yep.
You are 2 for 2. Let's get this third question in, see how you do, see if you're a top shelf pod. Hum as much as you can from the famous Deus Irae.
Bum, 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 bum. That's a whole 7-note thing.
Let's have a listen. That is the famous.
I want to be on the top shelf.
Deus Irae, you are a top shelf pod for sure. Deus Irae, episode 107, sort of like the Wilhelm scream. It's a commonly used vocal trope that you will hear in tons and tons and tons of movies. That's episode 107. Yep. Good place to start for this pod, just to kind of dip your toes in.
Yeah.
It's the year 2040, and they build the Podcast Hall of Fame and you've been invited to have a room, a kiosk over there in the corner where you have the stand. And as patrons walk up to it, there's a little red button, and they press that red button. What is the sound from your podcast? Is there a clip? Is there a moment that you wish to be played at the Podcast Hall of Fame?
Ooh, I have never been this at a loss. Oh God, there's so many clips in the show that I just love. I think that like the thing that I love the most, whether it not be like the full context of the show, but I think my favorite ending from a guest was the end of our Hamilton episode, where the sound designer Nevin we talk about all how amazing like how they get to this point, and then it all comes down to just like he's just like, I love the theater, I love the people, I love this and that. And I think that that's like the spirit of what matters here. It's just like, it's a show about a sense that we all have, but we don't think a lot about. But that this sense can kind of like unite us, just like food can unite us culturally. Like food can communicate so much about a culture and a history and community, and art does the same thing. Art brings us all together into a common appreciation for something, and with sound, I want that to be that too.
Dallas, is that the art behind? Because I originally thought record player when I looked at it, and then I realized, is that the stars? Is that a time lapse of the stars?
I always kind of my direction for that was like ripples coming at you of sound. So it's been updated since then to kind of give that idea, but then it does kind of swirl even more. And so it's kind of ripples coming at you, but it's also like kind of like swirls and stuff. But I like your theory. I might just
it's an exact replica of the stars, the time lapse, and hearing your philosophy. I was like, oh, now I get the art. Okay. Well, I do thank you for sharing this pod with us today, and I have loved listening to it. And as I said, it's changed my perception of sound and just of listening, and I'm sure it'll do the same for others. It is the last couple minutes of our podcast, and I do a thing here, the last 5 minutes of our podcast. No one ever listens to the last 5 minutes of any podcast right now. They've done what they're doing, and they had to go pick up their kids, and they're done cooking the meal. So no one is here, Dallas. And so it's just you and I. And if you want to reveal a secret or tell off a former lover or just sing a song or recite a poem, you certainly can. But I'll go first.
Didn't I get an email about this? And I put something in the email about what I was going to talk about, and I do not at all remember what my secret
pressure.
was.
It doesn't have to be anything. You don't have to talk about that thing. You can talk about how you're feeling today or what you had for lunch. But I will go first if you want to vamp or think about it.
Sure.
And that is just to say, it's likely, like I said, our last record of the year. And this is normally where I would joke about, the fact that no one is listening, and I'll share a secret or something embarrassing about myself. But instead, I just want to say thank you to the people that have been listening, because I have heard from you, and you've emailed and texted and said that you're enjoying learning from our hosts. And you kind of hear this a lot on podcasts, that it's been a tough year, and it has been a tough year for some of us here too at the Pod Spotter. And this podcast has been a bright spot, and it's been fun, just sharing this content with people and talking about the thing that creators love the most in the world, and sharing these moments with them every week and sharing them with people that are listening. So thanks for listening, and thank you to the PodSpotter team, because there's a lot of folks that help me do this, producers, sound engineers. Thank you, everyone, for helping me do this every week, and it's just been a blast celebrating sound. And so thank you, Dallas, for being here.
Yeah. So I think I have my thing.
Got it?
Because it also goes around the number 5. So last 5 minutes, 5 notes that changed my life. I've never put this on a podcast. I've never put it on mine. I've never talked about it to any other podcast. But if there was ever a biography or like big moments in my life that led me in a direction, I will say that the first 5 notes of Radiohead's Everything in Its Right Place changed my entire trajectory from being a classical musician to everything I do now. Because it just opened my mind when I was about 20 years old to this whole new idea of how music and art could come together. And it's the first 5 notes of Everything in Its Right Place from Radiohead. At that time, I was coming out of being a trumpet player. I mean, shortly after this, I started struggling really badly with like performance anxiety as a trumpet player. And I kind of lost my ability to perform at a really high level. I knew my whole trajectory was to either be a trumpet performer or a conductor or a composer for symphonies. And that kind of album came out in a time where I was really kind of struggling with my identity and understanding of what my future might be. I was in the middle of college, starting to have little glimmers of performance anxiety, starting to understand that like maybe this direction isn't the direction I was going to go. But those 5 notes, like I remember exactly where I was when I heard them. I know exactly who told me to listen to that album. And it came at a time where where I needed to hear that. And that kind of changed my whole direction. It was a pivotal moment that went from the direction that could have been my entire life to the direction that I've led now.
You hear about this sometimes from musicians, especially percussive instruments. Like performance anxiety is real, man, because you're pulling a note out of nothing, out of thin air. You're like hit a C, and so oh my god.
And a trumpet, if you can imagine, just the lip muscles are so delicate. So if you even have anything you think is coming out of that bell and screaming.
Thanks for being here, man, and thanks for sharing your love of sound. This was awesome.
Well, thanks so much.
This has been the Pod Spotter, where we showcase the pods that you just need to know about. But if you have one that I need to know about, let me know via thepodspotter.com or Facebook or Twitter or Instagram at thepodspotter. Thank you. This has been Zach Robinos. The Pod Spotter is created by the Price Brothers, produced by Oink Inc. Radio, associate producer Tori Adams, and is recorded and produced at Baker Sound in Philadelphia.